right? And so how can we teach people from an inward standpoint? Now that, one of the things that we're starting to say is we have two worlds, right? We have the physical world and the digital world. But what world matters the most?
Yeah.
The inner world of people.
Yes.
The
It's
inner
true.
world,
Yeah.
right? And so whatever, based upon where people are in their inner world will dictate what you do in the physical world and what you can do in the digital world.
Welcome to the Chesley Lunday Experience. The purpose of this podcast is to help your church innovate in an age of disruption. But to do that, you can't continue what you've always done. No, you need new ideas and creative approaches to rethink and redesign the methods of the past. Now, I'm your host, Chesley, and I help you discover those out-of-the-box aha moments so that you can apply them to your unique context. Today, on episode 9, we're continuing our conversation with Jeff Hook. And that's what this conversation is all about, redesigning the methods of the past, rethinking a new way to do church for a new generation. Now, Jeff Hook has some authority in this section because he's the CEO of a new software platform for the faith industry. And it's no secret that churches and other faith-based organizations are slow at taking advantage of new information technologies. His company, Communitas, is out to change that. Its mission is to partner with these organizations to provide modern technology to help people live better Christian lives. And prior to Communitas, Jeff spent the past 16 years helping churches improve congregational engagement through better systems to achieve better outcomes. He was COO of ParishSOFT, a software company serving half of the Catholic market. And before ParishSOFT, Jeff founded Fellowship Technologies in 2004 with a little product you might know called Fellowship One. They served over 3,000 churches in 15 countries. And Fellowship One had 54 of the top 100 largest churches and 46 of the top 100 fastest growing churches in America. Now, Jeff has spent time consulting with other software companies and had other executive positions in those companies as well. I'm excited to continue my conversation with Jeff as we begin to unpack what it looks like to rethink church for a new generation and why we should do that. Let's jump in. Yeah, you're talking about like a social contract in some ways.
In some ways, you're right.
Yeah. So, okay, let's dig into this. The next section really is, what is the product that the church, if I can use that term crassly, like what is it that we are supposed to be doing? Because maybe we've gotten confused and thought that the event is the main thing. What is it that we're supposed to do?
The event is the main thing. Thinking comes from history.
Yeah, it does.
And
yes.
The church, when we were a rural society, the people were farmers. So when are the farmers able to, after they've milked the cows, how can they, and taken care of their morning chores, they'll get dressed up, go to church, right? But back then as well, much of the congregation was illiterate, right? So I think there's several books out there on how we got to where we are based upon the church and the traditions. But it's awfully easy to confuse the traditions of the church with the scriptures and say, oh, well, we got to do this because of the scripture, but it's nowhere in scripture, right? And so we do so much and we get it confused in our belief systems of what church is really supposed to be. And what it needs to do is teach us about God, teach us about love, and it has to teach us about ourselves too. Because if I don't understand who Jeff Hook is, how am I going to transform his life into that model Christian?
Okay, so that is a great way to start this because I'm thinking through what you're saying is that we had an event-based structure because of the fact that they needed somebody who could read the Bible and explain it to them in a way that they would understand. and they needed a focal point to come from their 30-minute ride on a horse or a walk into a place to convene on a regular basis. That they needed that
Correct.
to be connected. And
yes.
that was the Facebook of their day, was a church right smack dab in the middle of a town square. That was everybody's social platform. And it was also their educational platform to learn more about Jesus.
Yes.
And so now, because of digital technology, we have a very different world. So what maybe should we do, if you could, maybe have a little bit of conjecture or project into the future, what would a new design look like for a church in the future be, knowing what we know now and the technology that we have?
Well, it goes back to who are you trying to serve, and what's this ministry model framework that serves those people best. If your people don't have smartphones or they don't have high-speed internet, then that part of your digital strategy that's not going to be part of your digital strategy. So first, who are we serving, and how can we also then be inward focused and outward focused? Because if we can't be a holy huddle. How many times have you been in a church scenario and people criticize, well, that's just a holy huddle? That's not biblical at all, right? And so how can we teach people from an inward standpoint? Now that, one of the things that we're starting to say is we have two worlds, right? We have the physical world and the digital world. But what world matters the most?
Yeah.
The inner world of people.
Yes.
The
It's
inner
true.
world,
Yeah.
right? And so whatever, based upon where people are in their inner world will dictate what you do in the physical world and what you can do in the digital world. But a once a week reminder doesn't change habits very well,
No.
right? And so as we understand psychology and we understand even how the brain's put together, and that the mind might be separate from the brain, right? I love to study the new things that are coming out. I like to say, I don't know if I've asked you this, but what's the study of God's creation called?
Biology, zoology, it's just science.
Science.
Right?
It's science. So we're learning more and more about God's creation. I mean, you think God's surprised that we were able to use part of the spectrum for, communications?
Yeah, no.
That's why he made the
Exactly,
spectrum,
yeah.
right?
Yes.
Right. And so as we start applying science to the faith, we should not be scared of science in our faith world. Jesus said the truth will set us free. We're scared because, what about Darwinism? Well, Darwinism, we're finding out, had some data points that were
and
true,
some that were not.
but there's so much more that and some that were not, right? And so I think, when I was a kid, Josh McDowell and Evidence That Demands a Verdict was the best apologetics. These intelligent design guys, and what, the Signature and the Cell and Stephen Meyer and, Darwin's Doubt and things like that, that's going to be the best new apologetics that these young kids need exposure to. And every local pastor is not going to be an expert in that. But there could be some digital content that the churches curate that still has the church's brand on it, so that I have more of an affinity, because I know that this church that I've connected with is providing me a complete education about all things God.
I think that's scary for most pastors, but I think they need to understand. You had Darwin observing things in nature and making discerning opinions about what he saw because of that. So he made an entire narrative up because of his observations in nature, right? So there is a place for the theologian in this new world, and it is a discernment. Back before Darwin and them separating religion and science, what happened was you had philosophy, you had science, and you had theology as one field. It was the scientific revolution and Darwinism that actually scientific community detached philosophy and religion and said, we don't need any of that stuff, and actually made a philosophy and theology all their own, And so now what I see is science, and I think this is what you're saying as well, is science actually will lead us back to theology and philosophy, because data, observation of nature leads us. The deeper you get into physics, the more you get into the idea of, whoa, there must be a God out there. There must be a creator to this. And then now, once you get there, you have to have a theology and you have to have a philosophy of what does that mean for man. And so the three are reemerging together.
Yeah. So something that just came to mind is maybe we should be thankful for Darwin.
I think so.
Because he gave us a temporary platform to examine and to say, oh, this is interesting. Now let's test that.
Yeah, Darwin wasn't wrong. He was just incomplete.
So it gave us a temporary platform. Yeah, it gave us a temporary platform to start understanding how God used nature to create the world that we live in today. Was he right? No, he didn't know about DNA.
No, he didn't.
I like to say, it's hard for me to believe the primordial soup that was struck by lightning and created life. But I really liked what Stephen Meyer said in an audible that I listened to called "In the Beginning Was ... information." So if life and these protons got into the right sequence, how did it recreate itself?
Yes, it's really, really hard to do.
It evolved to have DNA. Well, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. But we can't think that that everything that we have to believe is in the Bible, because there's so much that wasn't recorded. Case in point, Noah, when he came off the boat, he planted a vineyard and he got drunk. And those verses are right next to each other. So those were either the fastest growing grapes we've ever seen, or there were things that happened that aren't in the Bible.
It's true.
In between the verses, right? And so we have to look at everything before we jump to conclusions. People that you think about Jesus turning water into wine, and it was the best wine. Well, if you know anything about wine back then, when wine oxidizes, it gets bad. So yes, Jesus was probably a good winemaker, but more importantly, the validity of the fact is it was new wine. So it hadn't turned any kind of vinegar.
That's good.
And we have to look between the verses or between the lines of what does this mean?
And you are saying this because we are looking at, hey, we've got to customize our approach to helping people become more in tune with the Holy Spirit, grow in maturity. And so really what you're saying is discipleship. That term, right? We've talked about this term might be a little too archaic and might be too little out of the mainstream for non-Christians to understand. Yeah.
For unchurched people.
But it is the missing link is what you think.
But let me, Well, and what I also, when you think about discipleship or you think about reaching the culture today, the culture today is more intelligent. An 18-year-old person knows more today than I knew when I was 18, and I was a pretty smart guy.
Yeah.
Right? And we're having problems in our public school systems because they're teaching in a lot of ways the same way we've always taught. Yet these guys, they go to YouTube and they can see nearly about anything and learn about anything. Whereas when I was a kid, I either went to school or I went to the library or I went to the encyclopedias. Those are the only ways I could have
Jeff, what's
learned
an
back then.
encyclopedia?
Or
I know what
experience.
Wikipedia is, but yeah,
Or experience.
yeah.
I could learn by experience. But these youth of today are going, why am I sitting in this chair learning about some things that either I already know
Yes.
or I don't believe is useful to
Yeah.
me in this world, right? And so they're frustrated. And when we force them to learn that way, they're going to have anxiety because they're not going to have good grades. And then a certain number of
And
them
that's
will
why I
get
don't need
depressed.
college algebra. Yes. No, I'm thinking of my little boy. He's 8 years old. He does basic algebra for fun. He loves numbers, but he's in second grade. They
Yeah.
haven't taught him that yet. So he's like, why do I have to go to school? I know all this stuff already. I'm like, because it'll build character. So you got to do difficult things you don't like to do.
And they're teaching people in high school. Yeah. I mean, that's very, but they're teaching people in basics about how to, in high school and how to program. Whereas we didn't teach how to program in high school when I was a kid, and it was a specialty. But the school system is saying in the future, there's going to be so much around information manipulation, if you will, that everybody should learn at least the basics of programming.
I think high school's too late. So I got my little 8-year-old boy that he's already getting into coding. So I would love to drill down on the centralized idea of church versus decentralized idea of church, because what you're saying is it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. It just can't. But when you have that,
no, it can be. It's just
right. Well, and people, I say
model.
It can't because it's nobody wants that anymore. Like, I go to Starbucks. Right. I don't buy what's on the menu. I go and I say, I want a quarter sweet, sugar-free cappuccino, hazelnut, extremely hot with oat milk, so, and they're like, oh, customization. They hate it. But that's the same problem that the church is feeling right now, is customization is eating away at their product, if you will. So how do they fix that?
Yeah, it's really, customization is to have it your way anytime you want it differently. It's really mass personalization, because you tend to want the same things over and over for your needs, at least for a period of time.
Coffee every day.
But think about how long you've been married. Yeah, how long you've been married?
Decade. Yeah,
a decade. And how many kids, and how old are they?
I've got 2, 7 and 8.
So you've been married a decade. Is your marriage, and if I could help you with your marriage with some advice, would that be different advice today than it was 8 years ago, 9 years ago?
Very much so.
Right. And so, and how old are your kids?
7 and 8. I'm just
7 and 8.
So, like, kids changed our marriage completely.
But parenting an 8-year-old, is that the same as parenting a 2-year-old?
No.
So, but typically churches will have a marriage class or a parenting class. But we really need to specialize this, because I need to learn how to better, instead of a general parenting class or a general marriage class, I need to, what's that first year like? What's that, 7th year like, because a lot of people get divorced with that 7-year itch. What's it like to be married when I'm going to be an empty nester? How can I prepare for this? And what's it like to parent if my kid's a different personality type, or if my kid has some autism, or I'm a single mom, or my marriage is a blended family? We call these family dynamics. How can a church provide all of that? They can't, but they could curate content that was produced by specialists who know those things.
So you can't scale content for everyone, or can you?
I'm not sure I understand you can't scale content for everyone in the physical world. It's just too expensive.
Right. Because I'm
but
thinking,
I
if
can
you have a
scale
class for
that in
this
the
and a class
digital.
for this and a class for this and a class for this, like you have to staff all of those, and it's not, you're talking about maybe 8 people out of a church of 1,000 needs that, so that becomes very, like, it's not scalable. It actually, you will bog down your system and you'll go broke.
And think about discipleship. Let's go back to that. So somebody who is just learning about God versus someone who has so matured that they're living a life of love.
Yeah.
Or somebody who's going through what the Critical Journey book calls the wall. I like to refer to it as the dark night of the soul.
Mm-hmm.
They're on different stages, is what the Critical Journey book, but call them steps, call them whatever you want, cohorts. They're dealing with different things. And so one of the breakdowns of the current seeker-sensitive church is it's all baby milk.
Yeah.
And so as I get more mature in my faith, that baby milk, even as Paul said, no, it's time to give you some solid food.
Right.
Because you're not going to be the leader I need you to be and the disciple maker I need you to be if you're used to drinking baby's milk.
Yeah. And that's the biggest difficulty when you have a church that has scaled as far as like a centralized platform with a large church, right? Because it's all one size fits all. You get stalled right at I've got you into groups and I got you into serving. And so as a volunteer, and so there's no ability to move up in maturity, because the content has to be for the lowest common denominator rather than people along the way having the content that works for whatever stage they're in maturity. So how do you design a church that literally has content specifically designed for where you're at? So digitally you can scale that, but then that takes the commodity of the Sunday morning service with preaching, and it really lowers the value of that. So how would you scale a church in a way that understands that paradigm shift?
Yeah, I think, Sunday morning could become, if you think about building community, so what if Sunday morning became where the pastor gave a 15-minute talk and then brought somebody from the congregation up to talk about their journey as it relates to something that could play off of that 15 minutes, right? And then even to be more interactive. I see the church of the future where somebody can interactively type in some questions that then would be asked. But what's happening then? We're teaching. So the pastor has his moment. It's structured. But then we're bringing up somebody and having everybody in the community get to know them better, right? And then also engaging the congregation with some burning questions that they might have that's related to that.
Yeah. So
does that make sense? So
you got TED Talk, Oprah, and a Q&A all in one.
Right.
Yeah,
But let's talk about the outcomes then associated with that model. And does it create better community?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, what outcomes need to happen? Like, what outcomes are we looking for? What's the win? And I think is that different for every church, or is that still the same no matter what church you're in?
Well, it depends on going back to the model. If the model is a more geographical church, then it's probably kind of all the same. But if a church, and we're starting to have specialty churches on the internet, and if this specialty church is to help somebody who's dealing with a handicap, right? Or if this church is somebody who's dealing with drug addiction, which if you really think about it, CR or Celebrate Recovery is a specialty church helping somebody deal with something, right? So those outcomes that you're looking for in the specialty churches may be different, but the outcome in the geographical or general church and their strength in having the diversity of that general church, because to make me comfortable when I come to church, I want to see people who look like me.
Yeah.
Right. But to make me grow spiritually, I need to interact with people who aren't like me so that I can learn to love people who aren't like me, because that's the diversity that God has called us. He didn't say, hey, just love the people that you're like. He even said, love your enemies. Right? A lot of us Christians have talked about, oh, love the Lord your God, and then love your neighbors. They forgot about, oh, we're supposed to love our enemy too.
Yeah.
And do you see a lot of that happening, Chesley, in America?
No, not really.
Between people on the right and the left, and people on the, whether they're a blue or a red. How many purple people do you see out there that are bringing the blue and the red together?
Yeah,
not very many.
Not very many. Yeah. So what you're talking about really has to shift the paradigm from building a crowd to building a community, which is what I talk about often.
Correct. Or the way I say, the way I say, let's stop building audiences and let's build community.
Yeah.
And an audience isn't going to naturally be a community.
True. But most people are deceived into thinking that is going to be the case. If you'll listen to me for long enough and I'm loud enough, then you will learn what I'm trying to teach you, which is not actually true.
Yeah, and think about this. How you have Jeff Hook, a CEO of a technology company on the podcast, and we're really not talking that much about technology.
No.
It's technology needs to serve what people are trying to accomplish in the physical world.
Man, I love this conversation with Jeff. I really believe we have to do a better job of church leaders of rethinking outcome-based discipleship. That's what my friend Brian Phipps talks about quite a bit. Outcome-based discipleship. What does that mean? That means designing everything that you do as a church around the outcome you want to accomplish. So often we get sidetracked by doing the things right in front of us. We never take time to stop and ask, why are we doing it? Why are we doing this activity? Is it creating the outcome we want in every one of our people? The reality is we want people to become missionaries where they live, work, learn, or play. And the reality is we do a lot of things in church that don't contribute to the outcome. In fact, as Jeff put it earlier in the conversation, the whole model that we have for church was built in a time and place where they needed to come to a centralized platform to connect with each other. They needed to listen to the Word of God and the commentary about it, the teaching about it, because they didn't know how to read. Well, we don't have that problem in many of our places in America today. We can readily get on Google and find what the Bible says about something. We can get together and connect online. Obviously, we can't do face-to-face often online, but we can absolutely do face-to-stage. And so we might need to rethink what a church service might look like to help contribute to the desired outcomes we want. But what are those desired outcomes? Obviously, as somebody that wants to make disciples and be faithful to the Great Commission, I'm going to design my community in a way that will build that. But let's be honest, every community has these little nuances that are uniquely you. Well, that contributes to the outcome. But you've got to be intentional about talking about it, about designing everything you're doing around it, and spreading the vision around it, and designing every part of the process around it. We need to rethink church for a new generation because we need to rethink church around our desired outcomes. This is the truth. Are we getting the desired outcomes we want? Because we are perfectly designed to get the outcomes we're already getting. I'm going to say that again. We are perfectly designed to get the outcomes we're already getting. Hey, if this is something that has added value to you here, here's the best way you can be a part of this show. As I help you solve your most pressing problems, we want you to be on this podcast. I don't want to just do interviews with authors and thought leaders. I want to do interviews with you. I want to do a live coaching session with you with your most pressing problem, because here's what I know. I know that the best episodes that we have are the ones that we do solving the problems to help you. And so if you would like to be a part of that process, I'd love for you to email us at podcast@chesleylunder.com. Again, that's podcast@chesleylunder.com. The best way this podcast continues to grow is by you, people like you, posting a rating and review. So if you think more people would enjoy listening, then would you please do this for me? Would you please rate and review on whatever platform you listen? Obviously, this isn't just for me. This is for your friends that need help as well. So we would love for you to do that. Next episode, we conclude our conversation with Jeff Hook. I'm excited about this because we dig into the nuts and bolts of what it looks like to build a community rather than build an audience. Take a listen.
Yeah, and think about this. How you have Jeff Hook, a CEO of a technology company on the podcast, and we're really not talking that much about technology.
No.
It's technology needs to serve what people are trying to accomplish in the physical world.
Yeah, when I'm coaching other churches, that's the first question they ask is, what platform should I be on? What kind of infrastructure should I have? And I'm like, that is the last question. You can beat digital disorientation, but it takes imagination. It takes innovation. You have the spark of divine creativity your organization needs. I know it isn't cool to feel disrupted, but I believe God has the answer for you to move you and move your organization from disrupted to disruptive. All you need to do is move out in faith and try something new. Thank you for listening to the Chesley Lunday Experience.